Identity. The fact of being or feeling that you are a particular type of person, organization, etc. The qualities that make you a person, organization, etc. different from others. Reputation. The opinion that people in general have about someone or something, or how much respect or admiration someone or something receives based on past behavior or character. In the gaming industry, reputation is one of the biggest reasons for people to buy a game, and building a positive one is certainly your highest priority. Either that or being so big that nobody can do anything about it, eh Nintendo? But while building a reputation is hard, the same cannot be said about losing it. One of such ways is by losing the aforementioned identity. A gaming franchise holds a special place in people's hearts, and said franchises have something that defines them. An identity. The easiest way to lose that reputation that you once held is probably by taking that beloved IP you once masterfully created and ruining it, whether it be by pure internal greed or by third-party intervention. I want to interrupt the video for a bit to say that this video should have come out like 3 weeks ago, but I had exams until the 19th of January, and on the 22nd, Enfield released, and then I got hooked into OG Arknights again after like a year and a half of not playing. So I straight up haven't done anything but that for like 2 weeks, so yeah, I'm sorry about that. So as I was perusing the recommended tab on YouTube, it recommended me one of Flickazoid's videos that I had already watched, and thus began a chain of me watching multiple of his videos, including the Suicide Squad one and the Saints Row one. That got me thinking, it is kind of insane the amount of companies that just shot themselves in the foot. And even though before that you would trust them to release a quality product, after that release, you just won't trust them again. So I decided to compile a list of companies that ruined their reputation and no longer have that trust that they used to have before. They don't have the reputation to create something of quality. Before we even begin, I want to set some, I don't want to say rules, because they aren't, but more like the points by which I made this list. This list is purely based on my opinion. If you trust any of these companies in this video, which first of all, why? That's fine. I just don't have any hopes for anything that they will ever release again. This video will not include any roller coaster company, as I like to call them, companies that release or publish so many games that realistically you can pinpoint a game or sequence of games that killed their reputation. Most of these games were massive flops. There will be some exceptions here and there. Some of these are not just one game. There are multiple that built up that stair towards that company's demise. And yeah, that's really every rule I applied to myself when creating this list. I 100% forgot about some company. If you can think of any, leave it in the comments below. And if there is enough, maybe I will do another video about this, because it is kind of insane the amount of companies that just decide that they don't want to exist anymore. Originally founded in 1999, Arkane Studios is a French video game developer mostly known for their Dishonored series, a series of games that involve stealth and the use of really cool abilities all in a meticulously crafted steampunk world. That series was a massive success, and it saw 3 games, Dishonored 1, 2, and Death of the Outsider, alongside a bunch of novels, a tabletop game, comic books, and animated shorts. In 2017, they decided to create something different, and they released Prey. This time a space game with aliens, and they succeeded. They not only created a masterpiece, but also one of the best games of all time, with one of the greatest final plot twists in video game history. But sadly, this is the last time Arkane would be the same. 2 months after the release of Prey, Rafael Colantonio, the director of Arkane for 18 years, leaves the company to focus on his family, quoting, "It is time for me to step out to spend some time with my son and reflect on what is important to me and my future." This was not good for the company. Arkane would spend the next years helping other studios, like Bethesda, in the development of one of the worst games of all time on release, Fallout 76, and the first of what would be the downfall of the studio, Wolfenstein Youngblood. This is a bit of a tangent, but this game set in the Wolfenstein universe is complete dogshit. It is horrendous and one of the worst games I've played, and an insult to the Wolfenstein franchise, especially after coming from Wolfenstein The New Blood and The New Colossus. In 2019, at E3, they announced their new game, set in the same universe as the Dishonored games, titled Deathloop. Now, while this game isn't bad, I wouldn't call it great either. It's fine, but it certainly was a disappointment to me after coming from the first 2 Dishonored. The game released in 2021, and this is when everything went to hell. On one of their massive shopping sprees to kill the competition, Microsoft bought ZeniMax for $7.5 billion, one of the biggest purchases of all time. And as we all know, Microsoft is kind of a reverse King Midas, in the sense that everything they touch becomes dogshit. So what happened? Well, Arkane Austin, one of the subsidiaries of Arkane, develops Redfall, a first-person vampire shooter that cost $70 to buy and one of the worst games of 2023. It was a massive flop, hitting a player cap of less than 6,200 concurrent players on Steam, and it ended up costing 96 jobs, as Microsoft would go on a closing spree, closing down Arkane Austin and causing any and all content that was supposed to come to Redfall to cease to exist. The game featured mediocre graphics, terrible combat, an incredibly shallow and boring story, one of the worst AIs I've ever seen in a video game, and all of that for the modest price of $70. Suffice to say that whenever I see the name Arkane from now on, your expectations should be set to zero, especially because their newest game is a Marvel Blade game, one of the most beloved superheroes on television. I remember seeing the announcement they made and my jaw dropped to the ground. A Blade game developed by Arkane. That's gonna be a sight to behold. If it ever releases, which, let's be honest, it probably won't. It is safe to say that one of the biggest gaming franchises of all time is Grand Theft Auto. During the 2000s, it was probably the biggest thing you could think of in the gaming industry. GTA's Vice City, GTA San Andreas, GTA 4, which that game is still one of the most underrated games of all time, and one of the best looking games of all time with some of the best physics ever created, but alas, multiple companies tried to copy that success. And probably the only one that succeeded in doing so, at least that I can think of, is Volition. Originally created in 1993 by the name of Parallax Software, they would create such games as Descent 1 and 2. In 2002, THQ Nordic bought Volition, who had changed its name already, and they would end up releasing such games as Red Faction, and the one that everybody knows them from, the Saints Row franchise. At one point, Volition held one of those brainstorming sessions, and they decided to create a Fuck the Police game. Yes, the song. And in 2006, they released the first Saints Row. Granted, that one is much different than its sequels, but it did sell well enough to warrant the creation of this new beloved franchise. In 2008, they would release Saints Row 2, and in 2011 they would release Saints Row the Third. I consider this game one of the best games of all time. The combination of the gameplay, the customization, the story, but especially the comedy. This game cemented itself no longer as a GTA clone, but as a game of its own, and a great one at that. The game was such a success that they created a fourth game and a spin-off that weren't as successful, but they weren't bad enough to warrant you to stop seeing the name Saints Row and thinking that the game would at least be decent. But all of that changed in 2022, or realistically in 2019, since that when a new entry in the Saints Row franchise started to be created, and a reboot of all the options. Has any reboot in video game history been successful beside the Tomb Raider Survivor trilogy? Like, genuinely, I can't think of a single one that didn't outright kill the franchise. In 2022, the game released, and let me tell you, you could make the argument that it was worse than Redfall. It's genuinely baffling. Nothing in this game tells you that it's a Saints Row game. The humor, oh my god, the humor. I'm just gonna let the Charlie clip play because what is this thing?
Fall in line. What the deuce?
Oh fuck, I've seen this whole dialogue on Twitter.
The fucking deuce.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
What the fucking dadgum deuce?
It's so bad. Oh my lord.
What the dadgum goddamn caterwauling taradiddle deuce?
They're killing it. Let's go.
Criminal.
We're just getting started. It's like 4 minutes.
Jesus goddamn fucking criminy to the plum dang dickens with an ace high, lambasted bag of nails, bad box of boulder dash, tarnation and thunderation. And that's for Simon Fury.
Amen.
The game peaked at less than 4,200 players, and after that extremely successful release, its parent company Embracer Group decided that they would be better off in the hands of Gearbox instead of Deep Silver. But alas, we all know what happened. On August 31st, 2023, Volition ceased to exist as part of Embracer's restructuring. with Embracer giving Red Faction and Saints Row to Plion. So technically this one isn't much of a game that killed their reputation, this one is more of a game that straight up killed a company, which is kinda sad. I remember playing Saints Row 3 like in 2012 and remember enjoying it like hell, even more than some GTAs. Now I don't know if you could see an asterisk, but this one is different than the rest, as this company will probably not close anytime soon, unlike the rest, which either already have or are on the brink of death. After the closure of CAREER Studios in 2007, Shinji Mikami, Atsushi Inaba, and Hideki Kamiya decided to create Platinum Games. In less than a year, Sega announced that they would be publishing 4 of their IPs, including Bayonetta, Vanquish, Infinite Space, and Mad World, and so, with the release of especially the first 2, Platinum Games cemented itself as probably the single greatest hack and slash company of all time, creators of some of the best gameplay the world has ever seen. Their franchises saw massive success, especially the Bayonetta one, spawning multiple sequels and spin-off, and probably their most famous game, Nier Automata. By 2017, Platinum Games had some of the best games of all time under their wing, with some of the best combat and replayability the world has ever seen. Vanquish, Bayonetta, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, The Wonderful 101, Nier Automata, all games praised by the gaming community. But it all changed when the Tencent Nation attacked. In January of 2020, Tencent Holdings invested in Platinum Games, which allegedly allowed them to self-publish their games. I remember seeing this news that day and thinking to myself, this is not gonna end well, is it? And it didn't. By February, they started a Kickstarter to remaster The Wonderful 101, which, why would you do a Kickstarter for that? By the way, the remaster ended up being shit. Who could have guessed that a remaster of a game that was meant to use the Wii U to its full potential would be bad? At E3 2019, Platinum would show their new IP, this time called Babylon's Fall. I remember the first time I watched that gameplay, I thought it looked great. Maybe I am misremembering and it looked like shit, I haven't watched that trailer in years, but as said at the beginning, people had put their trust in Platinum due to their reputation of banger after banger. In 2021, the game would be shown again, but this time defined as a live service game. And it was then when I knew they had just killed the game. Well, what happened? It flopped. And it flopped hard. It barely surpassed the 1000 player mark and it ended up being complete dogshit. The game looked like shit, it was a live service game that was greedy as fuck, it was boring as all hell, which was insane coming from Platinum Games of all companies. The game ran like shit, nothing in the game was salvageable. And it wasn't really that surprising. Ever since they announced it as a live service game, we all knew the game was gonna suck. And it did. So what happened with Platinum? Nothing, they are still around. They developed that shitty sequel of Bayonetta 2, and yes, I said it, I hate this game, what the fuck is this character? They co-developed a bunch of games, including Final Fantasy XVI, which does have some of the best gameplay out there, and Grand Blue Fantasy Relink until 2019 when they stopped. Their newest co-production was Ninja Gaiden 4, which I enjoyed quite a bit, and you could tell that gameplay core of Platinum Games was still there, which goes to show that they still have it in them to create something of quality, but not by themselves. Their 2 latest projects that they fully created were complete disappointments, and Kamiya left in 2023. Nothing in that company is what it used to be. They have a new game in production called Project GG, which was originally directed by Kamiya, but that's a bit hard to do now, so it probably will never release. And I'm gonna be honest, if it does, it will probably be a massive disappointment. The reason this one is on the list is probably the most personal one of all of them. Nier Automata is one of my favorite games of all time. Every time I hear Weight of the World, I cry. It's one of those songs that I can't even think of without weeping. It's a game I have played multiple times, and seeing them go from that to Babylon's Fall and Bayonetta 3 was a stab to my heart. Now this one is in my top 3 for most hurtful. This company was founded in 2004 by ex-Argonaut Games developers, and in 2007 they acquired one of the biggest IPs in the world to create a game of, that being Batman. In 2009 they released Batman Arkham Asylum, a third-person action-adventure game that put Batman into a game perfectly. The use of his detective abilities, his combat prowess, the use of his gadget, a story that was compelling, graphics that were insane for the time, fantastic music, all to create a masterpiece of a game. So obviously, Warner Brothers decided to put some money into the company and bought a majority stake in the studio, and greenlit a sequel, this time called Batman Arkham City. This one I am gonna say it, is one of the best games of all time, period. This game is pretty much perfect. The story, the music, the representation of Batman, the amount of content the game has, the graphics, everything about it was perfect. Literally everything. And the people knew. It has sold 12 million copies since then, and it won multiple Game of the Year awards, and it was tied with Skyrim for the highest rated game of the year. In 2013, a prequel to both games called Arkham Origins was released. Not made by Rocksteady, one could tell that the game wasn't nearly as good as the other two, but it wasn't a bad game. And in 2015, they released what would be the final entry in the Arkham universe, Batman Arkham Knight. And people seem to have forgotten, but while I love this game and the graphics still look insanely good, like this is 2015. If you told me this released in 2024, I would believe you. While the game itself is fucking fantastic, people forget one thing. This game probably had the worst launch in video game history. When people think of poor launches, what comes to mind? I'm guessing the Holy Trinity comes to mind, you know, Mass Effect Andromeda, No Man's Sky, Cyberpunk 2077, 3 of the biggest flops of releases of all time. But I'm gonna be honest, I would actually remove Cyberpunk from this trio and put Arkham Knight in the equation. The game was unplayable on PC. Actually unplayable. While games like Cyberpunk and Mass Effect Andromeda were full of bugs, this game couldn't be played even in the highest of PCs. Such was the catastrophe that Rocksteady and Warner Bros. Went out of their way to issue a statement, and in June 24, 2015, the next day after the release of the game, they announced that they would suspend sales until the issues were fixed. The game was removed from every PC store known to man at the time and didn't come back until October of the same year. That's 4 months of issue fixing. Did that stop the game from being a success? Hell no. It broke the record that The Witcher 3 got earlier that year and was the fastest selling game of 2015 and the second best selling game of 2015, behind Mortal Kombat X. That is another franchise that I could have included in this video, huh? Anyway, that wasn't really what killed Rocksteady. It was 2020. In that year, they announced their new game, a spin-off of the Arkham series, set 5 years after the end of Arkham Knight, this time called Suicide Squad. Killed the Justice League. Since the beginning, people had doubts because it was the Suicide Squad and because of the mess that was the Jared Leto movie, but they still held a bit of belief for Rocksteady, as they could give us gameplay like no other game, as Harley Quinn had already appeared in previous games, so they just had to expand from there and give us a great game. But no. What we got instead was this. A game that basically shits on everything you like about DC, that says fuck you to Batman multiple times, to the point they had to recon their own story to say that the Batman you killed was a clone. They gender bender Mr. Freeze for some reason. I'm not a comic nerd, but this still seems very weird. Also, she is extremely annoying. She genuinely doesn't shut up. And for some reason they yassified the Joker and made him, well, a joke. Anyway, to the surprise of nobody, the game flopped very hard, although it did hit 13,000 players on PC, which is less than half of what Arkham Knight got 9 years prior. All of this led to Rocksteady losing most of its employees and cancelling the content for the game in less than a year. Suffice to say that the name Rocksteady doesn't hold the same weight it used to. At least it doesn't to me. This one is probably the hardest one to evaluate, mostly because Avalanche doesn't really have that big of a name. Not only that, but they also haven't released anything since 2019. So this company is mostly known for the Just Cause franchise, originally created in 2003 by ex-FIFA developers. Yeah. They would release their first success in 2006 with Just Cause 1, and obviously they would release multiple sequels, the most famous one, Just Cause 3, in 2015. They also released that one Mad Max video game, which I think is very underrated. It was a great game. Sadly, it underperformed severely, and Avalanche would go back to creating Just Cause 4, and this one was a doozy. And it was a very mediocre game, especially compared to the previous one, and it flopped hard. So one would think that they would pour all their soul into the next entry, because otherwise it would be their doom if the next one failed. What people didn't remember is that 8 months prior to the release of Just Cause 4, there had been rumors floating around about a Rage sequel. It seemed like it would be developed by ID Software, but it came as a surprise when they revealed that Avalanche was co-creating it and the game released, and it was extremely mediocre. I'm gonna be honest, I do not remember much about this game. I remember watching it and playing it on release, but that's it. I remember not liking it, but nothing else. Literally, nothing else. It's like it got sent to the back of my brain, only to be remembered when it is mentioned. And to me that's the worst a game can be, and it's forgettable. Anyway, Avalanche since then hasn't published anything and has been in drama after drama. In 2021 they hired a project lead that had been accused of sexual harassment. Their employees asked them to do something, but they didn't. And after a year, that person voluntarily resigned. And in 2022, Avalanche issued an apology. But that's not all. In 2023, the workers in the company unionized hoping for better contracts, as it seems their contracts were complete dogshit, and they managed to succeed by 2024. Not that that mattered, because by June, they closed their offices in Montreal and New York, laying off 50 employees. And in September of last year, they said they would close their Liverpool offices. So yeah, it's not looking good for them. Just Cause 5 is still in development, at least I haven't read anything to say the opposite. Also, the reason I said it was hard to evaluate this one is because compared to the rest, the drop in trust from the consumers isn't as big as the others. Like yeah, Avalanche was known for one thing only, which they did well, but they didn't have a massive reputation. I still decided to include them because why not? At the end of the day, this is my opinion. We all saw this one coming from a mile away. This one I know a lot of people have hard feelings for. We all know what Bungie is. They created Halo Combat Evolved in 2001, one of the most famous shooters of all time and one of the biggest franchises in gaming. They have had comics, movies, animes and even live-action TV shows made from this one franchise. Granted, the TV show sucks, but that's not the point. Bungie was acquired by Microsoft in 2001, and they developed the first 3 Halos under their wing, until in 2007, when they went private. Soon after, they made Halo 3 ODST, a prequel and expansion to Halo 3, but their most important event would happen in 2013, when they would announce Destiny. 3 years prior to this announcement, Bungie entered a 10-year publishing agreement with Activision Blizzard to publish this new intellectual property. Destiny would launch in 2014 as a first-person shooter MMO. I have never been a huge fan of the game, but people seem to like the story and the gameplay, so much so that Bungie never gave sales numbers. Instead, they gave players and said that this was their best launch yet, which inspires confidence. This is sarcasm, in case anybody didn't notice. Now, normally when you hear these words, what comes to mind is sure thing, but because nobody believes them. But I'm inclined to, because they did release a shit ton of DLCs and expansions for the game, and they announced a sequel only 3 years later. Anyway, among the things that happened during the subsequent years, we have a $100 million investment by NetEase, and the release of Destiny 2 in 2017, which I just checked and it released in Stadia. Do you guys remember that thing? I had actually forgotten. Anyway, we all know where this is going. Destiny 2 ended up becoming free-to-play years after its release, vaulting content that people paid for, including the base story, and the game costing like $200, all expansions included. Kind of insane. After 2020, Bungie has been in a million lawsuits, and in both sides, as the accuser, such as against AIM junkies, which allowed people to cheat, or as the defendant in cases of plagiarism. In 2024, Bungie got sued by one Kelsey Martineau, alleging plagiarism of his work on WordPress for the release campaign of Destiny 2 Red War. Whether the case was legitimate and the accuser had reasons for it or not, that doesn't matter, as Bungie vaulting their old content made it impossible for Bungie to defend themselves against the accusations, because Bungie couldn't access vaulted content. You heard that right, people. The creators of said content cannot access their own content because it is vaulted, and according to them, incompatible with their new code or something like that. So what does Bungie do? Use YouTube videos as proof. The judge obviously called bullshit on that, and the case proceeded just 8 months ago. By November, both parties settled outside of court, but man, Bungie is loud with their lawsuits. They don't have as many as Nintendo, but they are much louder. They have also been in 4 separate unlicensed art uses since 2021. 4 different ones, including the one you're thinking of, Marathon. In 2022, Sony bought Bungie for $3.6 billion, in what is, according to a lot of people, the worst purchase in video game history. And soon after that, they would announce Marathon, a new entry in the original Marathon series, releasing 30 years after the last one. In May 2025, online artist Anti-Real demonstrated that a bunch of her art created in 2017 had been used in Marathon without her permission. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 assets. Pretty much the entire game was made with her art. So obviously this escalated, and Bungie has looked like a bunch of clowns since then. though they did reach a settlement last month, according to Anti-Real, to my satisfaction. This story is kind of sad for a lot of people. I'm not the biggest Halo fan, but I had to put this one on the list because I know a lot of Halo fans hate where Microsoft took the franchise after Bungie left in 2010, and seeing where their beloved Bungie went after Destiny, only creating live service games that are just wasted potential. And to me, that's the best way to describe Bungie. Wasted potential. Because Destiny has good things about it, but man is it destroyed by greed. Marathon is set to release in March 2026. Let's see if it does end up releasing, but I don't think it will. This one is 100% the most controversial opinion of this list. Obsidian is mostly known for releasing Fallout New Vegas in 2010, one of the most beloved games of all time, and around that time they also developed some bangers like Neverwinter Nights 2 and South Park and the Stake of Truth, or Pillars of Eternity. In 2018, Microsoft would acquire Obsidian, and in 2019 they would release one of the most mediocre games I've ever played, The Outer Worlds. With a lack of RPG elements, disappointing and shallow combat, a mediocre story, Obsidian's reputation started to dwindle, but it wasn't until 2025 that they shot themselves in the foot with, and I'm quoting Flick here, a Concord-level failure, with Avowed. If you thought The Outer Worlds was shallow, this game is somehow worse, pandering to a group that is never gonna play video games with the same terrible story, horrible gameplay, non-existent RPG elements, quality of life worse than games from the early 2000s. This game had all the negative things you can think of. And then 8 months later, they released The Outer Worlds 2, which was an improvement over The Outer Worlds 1, but it wasn't great either. It was still the same shallow combat, shallow story, and lack of attention to detail Obsidian was known for. This is another one of those cases of Microsoft just killing a company they own. And this is not the worst example, because if you are a really old school gamer, you should know the worst example of this from memory, and it would be the previous to last example on this list. When EA moved from San Mateo to Redwood Shores, they created a new game division called EA Redwood Shores in 1998, with their first game being Future Cop LAPD. But nobody cares about any of that. What you all care for is the directors of the company, Michael Condrey and Glenn Schofield, two big shots that would end up creating Sledgehammer Games in 2013 after leaving Redwood Shores, which would change its name to Visceral Games. Now you might be saying, what does that have to do with anything? Well, the latter of the two wanted to create a spiritual sequel to System Shock, that acclaimed game from the 90s. While that idea is going from head to head, they decide to publish a Godfather game. Yes, a Godfather game, there's two actually, based on the novels. Anyway, the idea of a System Shock sequel wouldn't come to fruition, or at least not with that name, as they would end up creating one of the most famous survival horror games of all time, that being Dead Space. I have a full video about the Dead Space trilogy, we're not here to talk about them. Now, funnily enough, the Dead Space trilogy technically contradicts one of the rules at the start, because technically they weren't flops numbers-wise for the consumers, as Dead Space 2, for example, sold 2 million copies in the first week, but sadly, all 3 of them were flops for the company. The amount of money invested into each game made it so that any amount of sale they ended up getting didn't matter. In early 2017, Disney, who had acquired Lucasfilms, shut down LucasArts, its game development studio. So EA, like the rats they are, scurried their way into Papa Disney's feet and begged for 3 of their studios to use the Star Wars IP, one of which was Visceral Games. Visceral was supposed to create a game by the codename of Yuma, an open world game where you played as a space scoundrel. They even bought Amy Hennig, the writer for the first 3 Uncharted games. The project changed name to Ragtag, but then in 2017, EA just goes and closes Visceral Games. Most people took this as a message of a gaming world that was changing towards more of a live service industry, like Fortnite and FIFA and Call of Duty. Granted, EA dismissed those claims, saying, quote, "The reason for Visceral's closure wasn't a single player versus multiplayer game issue, but instead one based on listening to player feedback and following marketplace trends. The company felt that the current design of Ragtag wasn't fitting these changes, and that the closure of Visceral and reassignment to another studio was because we needed to pivot the design." And Dead Space since then released one remake in 2023, and then EA just froze it. So yeah, in this case it technically wasn't a game performance that killed Visceral Games. In this case, it was one unfinished project and EA's greed, which, let's be honest, is that really surprising to any of you? So, I'm very young. I'm only 22, about to be 23, but even I know who Rare is. If you ask older people what Rare was, they would probably tell you something along the lines of one of the best game developers of all time. Originally founded in 1985, I'm just gonna give you a summary of Rare's accomplishments before 2002. We've got Battletoads and its billion sequels, Donkey Kong Country 1, 2 and 3, Killer Instinct 1 and 2, Donkey Kong Land, GoldenEye 007, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Perfect Dark, and that's only some of them. These guys release like 10 games a year, and most of them good. Granted, a bunch of them were re-releases on different consoles, but still, in 2002, as you've already guessed, Microsoft buys Rare, and from there on out, the company just isn't the same, releasing games like Viva Piñata in 2006, and nothing of quality ever since, with their latest flop being Sea of Thieves, a game so mediocre that it's laughable. Rare literally went from being an ape so big that nothing could stand in its way, to developing Sea of Thieves and remaking and rebooting their already existing franchises. In fact, since 2018, when Sea of Thieves released, they haven't fully developed a game. There's this one streamer I watch that has its share of years in the gaming industry, and every time he mentions Rare, it's like a piece of his soul just falls from his eyes. It is quite disheartening to see. Also, this one isn't technically one game either. This is more like 16 years of shitty decisions. I don't really know how long this section of the video will be, but I'm betting it's gonna be the longest one. This one is the one that hurts the most, and probably the most obvious one. Are you big on RPG games with romance? Yes? Do you like RPG games with meaningful decisions, fantastic characters, a great story and good gameplay? If you have, then you probably know of BioWare just from that alone. If you ask people about the best RPG games of all time, most lists will include multiple titles from BioWare, because from 1998 to at least 2014, BioWare was the king of RPGs. No other game company, at least in the West, could compete with them in RPG making. Their attention to detail, their extremely rich stories, their awesome gameplays, their romances, everything about the games was almost perfect. We've got the original 2 Baldur's Gates, the original Neverwinter Nights, the original Knights of the Old Republic, the Mass Effect trilogy, the Dragon Age trilogy, some of, if not the best RPGs ever created. But obviously, there were hiccups here and there. The biggest one you can think of is Dragon Age 2 in 2011. That's probably the year where BioWare started deteriorating. Dragon Age 2 was a massive disappointment after the previous game, not having any of the good things that made the previous game the masterpiece that it was. As if that wasn't enough, we all know what happened in March 2012. That month, Mass Effect 3 was released, and in one of the biggest and loudest boycotts ever, the community managed to make BioWare change the ending to Mass Effect 3, as a lot of people consider it extremely disappointing and straight up dogshit, to the point where a lot of people hate the entire franchise only because of how bad the ending was, or is, depending on how you see things. Months after, 2 of the last original creators of the company leave, and in 2014, shit goes down. BioWare releases their 3rd entry of the Dragon Age series, this time called Dragon Age Inquisition. This game was a major improvement from Dragon Age 2, but it wasn't really a Dragon Age. The story was cool, although it finished in a cliffhanger, and it sold extremely well. Not only that, it was also acclamated by the public because it ended up winning Game of the Year in the first event Game Awards in 2014. Drew Karpyshyn, the writer for the 2 original Mass Effects and Knights of the Old Republic, came back, but Dragon Age writer David Gaider left. So things would surely balance out, right? March 2017. A new entry in the Mass Effect universe releases, this time called Mass Effect Andromeda. A new game without Commander Shepard, say 500 years in the future in the Andromeda Galaxy. As I've said before already, if you weren't big into gaming at the time, you probably don't know this, but this is one of the worst releases of all time for a AAA title. The game was worse than a Ubisoft game. It was buggy as all hell. Is the game bad? No. Graphically it was decent, but again you could breathe and 5 bugs would spawn in front of you. The story was okay, although it was literally the Mass Effect trilogy story told again, but with different enemies. The combat was pretty good, and it had a decent amount of content. But for the romantics like me, the game wasn't all that. Unlike the previous 3 games, the romance in this game was very lackluster, mostly because it felt extremely short. Like, extremely short. Most romances had their scenes either cut out or straight up not made. So nothing really happened unlike the previous games. The game was a huge disappointment, to the point that EA put the entire Mass Effect franchise on hold. Then, 2019 happened. Originally titled Project Dylan, in reference to Bob Dylan, hoping to be remembered years after its release, Anthem was planned as a live service game and started being developed in 2012 under Casey Hudson, the producer of Mass Effect. People on the inside even compared it to FIFA in that sense. The game underwent a ginormous amount of changes in the years prior to its release. None of that would matter though, as Anthem would release in 2019, to the disappointment of many people, myself included. I was there on launch day, not as a fan of BioWare, not as a fan of anything, but just as a spectator of this new game that BioWare had just cooked up. And let me tell you, they burnt the kitchen. Heck, they burnt the house. After launch, players were disappointed by the lack of story and the lackluster endgame after just 30 hours in what was supposed to be a live service game. So EA decided to implement new content, live service style, but then stopped their plans to drop 3 acts in a period of a couple of weeks to reinvent the entire game. This time the updates would be seasonal, but that changed after just a year when they halted production for the seasonal content and straight up set the way to remaking the game. A full year after that, on February 2021, BioWare said they were halting all work on Anthem, but that they would continue to support it for the time being. On July 3rd, 2025, sales of in-game items were discontinued, and it was announced that Anthem would close on January 12, 2026. This being an online-only game meant that the game would become unplayable after its closure, being cited as one of the primary examples in the Stop Killing Games movement. Did that stop the game from closing? Hell no. As of when I'm writing this video, the game died like a week ago. So that's 2 flops for BioWare back to back. Let's go for the threepeat, shall we? We all know where this is going. So a new IP failed. Mass Effect failed. What do we do now? Oh yes, of course. Dragon Age, our latest GOTY winner. They did leave Inquisition on a cliffhanger, so surely they could write something at least decent. Like, come on, it's Dragon Age. Hell, they even said it in the trailer. From the people that brought you Dragon Age and Mass Effect. Surely it would be good. Right? Right? Dragon Age 4 was announced at the Game Awards in 2019. In the subsequent years, BioWare would release more trailers for the game, including revealing the official name, Dragon Age Dreadwolf, but that name would only last a year, as in 2024 the game's name was changed to Veilguard. Now, I don't want to really get political, but it is impossible to not get political when talking about this game. When you hear about a game, what is it you want to hear? You want to hear how good the story is, how good the gameplay is, how good the graphics are, something along those lines, right? Instead, Dragon Age the Veilguard's publicity was full of progressive stuff. I'm going to try to be as neutral as possible when talking about this game. The game would brag about being able to identify as trans, or that the characters had they/them pronouns, on all of that stuff, but nothing about the game itself. Surely the fact that you can have surgery scars in a world of magic is more important than its gameplay, right? When this game released, I don't think there wasn't a single person with at least 2 brain cells that didn't clown of this game. Nothing about it worked. The gameplay was horrendous. Maybe it's just me, but the game looks like it's made of plastic. All the characters got a glow up for some reason, when originally this was a dark game. Now it's all full of color. Now, color is not a bad thing, but in this game it 100% is. This game is the antithesis of BioWare. Oh, you want a great story? You won't get one, with one of the dumbest plot twists I have ever seen in video game history. Oh, you want great companions that don't make you want to shoot yourself in the head with a 12 gauge? Nope. Instead, you get all these whiny babies that talk about the insecurities alongside a 15-minute conversation about misgendering this one character that identifies as non-binary. You want good AI and good gameplay? Well, use your companion abilities once every blue moon and deal a bit of damage, and that's it. Wait for the cooldown. Oh, you want decent puzzles? Well, here are puzzles for 10-year-olds. Oh, you want meaningful decisions? Well, the best decision you can make is to not make any, because you get the best ending in the game by not doing a single character quest, a thing that was extremely common in all BioWare games to get the best possible ending. Why do I say that it's the best ending not doing any of them? Because every single companion dies. And this is when I have to get fully political. Like, I'm very sorry, but I just have to do it. There's no other way to talk about this. A lot of games don't want to be criticized for being, too woke or too progressive and all of that, and while some of that is understandable, you cannot in any way, shape or form defend this game. because even if you don't want to deal with modern politics, the game is gonna shove them down your throat every moment it can. The game was made in collaboration with Sweet Baby Inc. If you don't know what that is, just do a quick YouTube search, there are probably 70 million videos about it there. But just to give you the rundown, they are basically a company that extorted, and no, I am not joking, companies into making progressive decisions in their game. I'm talking about making a Nordic giant a black character, or this entire game, or trying to blackmail Wukong's developers because their game wasn't progressive enough. They are that kind of people, and sadly, they succeeded in a lot of games. But this one is probably the most egregious one. So what happened with the game? It did almost reach 90,000 players on Steam, but sales weren't looking good, and in fact BioWare did not give sales number and hasn't given one ever since. So it is pretty safe to say that the game flopped pretty hard, especially when you take into account EA's expectations. BioWare are developing a new Mass Effect game, a new main entry actually, which allegedly started development in 2020, but they only showed a teaser, which is very obvious that they didn't have a single thing done at the time and just rushed a teaser to appease the higher-ups. Anyway, on a different note, there's a Mass Effect live action TV show in the making. If it is the same quality as the Halo show, we are in for a ride. Anyway, I don't have high hopes for Mass Effect 4. I have replayed those games to the point that I know everything about them from memory. They are my favorite games of all time, but my expectations for Mass Effect 4 are so low that I generally think it won't even release. BioWare had a restructuring after the release of Belgard because, surprise surprise, it severely underperformed and their working staff was cut by half. BioWare, one of the best RPG makers in the world, is now close to digging its own grave after a decade of bad decisions. And it is actually heartbreaking to me how you could go from this to this. So yeah, that's really every company I wanted to put on the list. Were there others that I wanted to include? Yes, there was CD Projekt Red with the Cyberpunk release fiasco, but Cyberpunk was still a success. And they have The Witcher 4 releasing later this year, if I remember correctly. And I'm probably forgetting others. What company has disappointed you so much that you went from trusting them to actually feeling that whatever they come with next will be dog shit? Maybe I will make another video about this because I am quite a doomer, and I am of the opinion that the gaming industry is facing dark times right now, and good games aren't the norm. They are the exception, especially when it comes to AAA games. But anyway, that's really all I wanted to say. I probably left something out here and there, but this script is already long enough and I don't want the video to be 2 hours long. See you in the next one.